All right. Well, hello everyone. Um, I am Infinite. I am on my infinity screen. Hello, Sebastian, Wayne, uh, Tamara, Naya, Selena, Paulina. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Can I get just a quick let me know that you can hear me? All right. Awesome. I have a couple questions for you actually if at some point. Got a couple questions in our little question bank here. I just am curious, what are you guys doing in class, first of all? And then second of all, do you have any areas that you'd like me to discuss in future sessions? Just like to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of those two things as we move forward, and can definitely customize those things as we go from week to week. I'm just going to tell you a couple things before we jump into it. We're talking about the multiple choice. Hello, Brenda. We are going to be, kind of rolling out some stuff here as we get into this year. And let me see if I can explain this a little bit. So we're going to be live every week throughout the year. If you're joining us for the first time, hi, Valentina. As we get closer, we're going to have some extra cram sessions, okay, as we get very close to the exam, when you really are going to need us in May, and we'll definitely keep a finger on the pulse of things that you're still struggling with, things you're still worried about, and we'll focus on those things as we get closer. But definitely, as you guys are doing, going to the live sessions early give you your best chance of getting college credit. So you guys are in a really good position coming to this in September. But kind of stay tuned. I'm going to tell you a couple more things at the end of the session today and give you some ideas. We are going to be kind of moving forward as we get into October and so on and so forth. So tell you a little bit more as we get to the end today. I heard from a couple people last week that you were interested in multiple choice. I kind of wanted to keep going a little bit with the poetry prompt. And okay, cool. A doll's house. Yes, we do a doll's house, analyzing self in literature. Okay, cool. So the theme, and definitely Nora claiming that sense of self. Very cool. So, I was thinking about, let's keep going with the poetry prompt. Let's get better at the poetry prompt. I want to return to the poetry prompt again. And I want to really keep going with that and with the free response questions all throughout the year. But I heard, a couple people talk about multiple choice, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to introduce you to the multiple choice. And then as we get to the end, if you have other questions, we can kind of come back to that again. I think it's kind of a sad thing about American education that probably at this point you have taken a lot of multiple choice exams. And as a junior or senior in high school, you have a certain amount of expertise at this type of thing. Kind of a sad state of affairs. Okay, so Paul, I try to have this come in anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. Last week, we actually went a little bit long. But I think this is going to be a little bit on the short side, actually. So hopefully that answers your question. That's generally the case. Okay, so just some general things, probably some reminders, stuff that you've done in the past already, and just kind of remind yourself about some of those common sense skills, but then also just an introduction to the way multiple choice questions are set up on the exam. And we see certain things fairly frequently, exam to exam. And I got another good resource for you if you stick around, and I'll make that available to you at the end. So as I have done before, I'm going to switch over. Tell me that you still can hear me, and I'm going to switch back. Just make sure. Tell me if you can hear me as I go over, and you can see my slides. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing that screen. Just give me a yes, indicating that you can see My slides, yes. Okay, we're in business. All right, so welcome. We are doing maxing out your multiple choice score. Hopefully we have good. Okay. All right, present, start, presentation. Okay, here we go. So why would we care about the multiple choice? Well, it is 45% of your score, your overall score. So definitely makes sense to give it some good time and to familiarize ourselves with it. I wanted to remind you about the multiple choice. It is the first part of your exam, so you're going to encounter this as you arrive at the test early in the morning in May, and it is an hour long. You have 55 multiple choice questions. One half of those are going to be prose, one half of those are going to be poetry, and one half of those are going to be older, one half of those are going to be more modern. Okay, so just so you know kind of what to expect there. After that, you'll have a 10-minute break. You'll go back in and you have the free response questions. That's 55% of your score. That's 2 hours. You have 3 essay questions and prompts. The question number 1 is a poetry prompt. They'll give you a poem, and you have to write a timed writing about that poem. Question 2 is going to be prose. It is an excerpt from a novel, short story, and pretty much the same thing as the poetry prompt. And then finally, question 3 is the open prompt, which is going to ask you to choose a work of literature that you've read over the course of the year, and then see if you can answer a kind of open-ended thematic question. And so, Doll's House talking about, the nature of personality, or I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's kind of a big open-ended thematic thing. And then you take the Doll's House and use specifics from that book to answer that question. So we don't know what those are. We've touched on the open prompt a little bit in session 2 weeks ago. We touched on the poetry prompt last week. Want to touch on the prose prompt a little bit later because it really is based on the poetry prompt. But we are talking about the multiple choice today. So multiple choice, a couple things I'm going to go over. First of all, just an overview of sort of what it looks like, what you're going to expect to see there with the multiple choice section. I want to remind you of some general multiple choice skills, and in particular ones that work for the AP exam. And then I finally want to talk about types of questions that show up fairly frequently. And again, this is mostly just to kind of familiarize you with this. And then as you start doing multiple choice sections, you'll go, yeah, okay, yep, I've seen that type of question before. And I feel fairly good about it. Let's just actually, is there any question before we get going here, do you have any questions about the multiple choice in particular that you'd like me to address as I'm going through this? Let me flip back over again. Anything that's been kind of nagging you, either about the scoring of it or, about the nature of the questions or the nature of the passages or prompts. Let me just go over and see if you guys have any questions that I can talk about as we go through this. Okay, what are the prose questions? Okay, Brenda, in the multiple choice, they'll give you kind of a passage that comes from a novel or short story, and then they'll just ask you a bunch of questions about that prose passage. Now we are going to be talking about this in the essay section as well, because pretty much they have the same thing in the essay section. And the only difference is, instead of asking multiple choice questions about it, they are going to ask you to write an essay about it. So we will talk about that a little bit more in depth later. Okay, does that answer your question? All right, any other questions that you have about the multiple choice section? All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to switch over again and let's move on. And I think we're going to go a little bit faster this time. So there may be some time for us to ask more questions toward the end. But first of all, what does it look like? It looks like this. So what you'll have over there on the left side is a poem. Okay, and you read through that poem, you'll notice there are line numbers that they are going to be referring to throughout the questions. They are going to make frequent reference to the line numbers. And then they'll always try to set it up so you have facing pages like this, okay, so that you really can see the poem or the passage as you are answering these. And I guess one thing to point out is, first of all, just notice how often they use those line numbers. They're making reference to those line numbers, which are in the margins, pretty much making mention of that quite frequently. And then also notice that for those of you who have taken the SAT or ACT, we have a lot of these except questions, and they have those in all caps just because you could answer it not noticing the except. Make sure you notice the except there. That's a fairly frequent occurrence as well. All right. Here's a prose passage. So this is from a, let's see, that's a story, short story. And again, pretty much the same thing, so that you can see the passage as you answer the question. Again, you can see references to the line numbers. We don't really talk about lines in prose, but they will give you line numbers so that you can make reference to it. And again, we have a lot of these except type questions. Okay, so make sure to notice that. Okay, I want to go over some general multiple choice skills. And so one is annotate and mark the passage and the poem. Okay, so whatever that is, you should get into kind of some sort of system of annotating and marking. I would recommend really getting pretty sure about what you mean about these things, because it will allow you to go through that passage and poem and really make a lot of notes to yourself without having to write a lot. You have some symbols. I actually gave you a method of some symbols that you can use last week. I can post that again, actually, now that I think about it. But it's a good thing to get in the habit of annotating, circling, underlining, and coming up with a system that works for you. Use the questions. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about this. Look at the questions, and they can help you focus your reading, and then use some common sense tips when answering the questions, and I'll go over some of those common sense tips. Okay, so first of all, annotating and marking the passage or poem. Circle and connect any related words. You may notice that there's, some repeated words. You may notice that there's kind of repeated instances of irony, something where you're kind of making some connections. Circle those and maybe even draw lines between them as you see them. Really actively read and see if there are any connections or repetition of either actual words and phrases or just kind of like a certain type of passage that you're noticing throughout. Underline key statements for sure. Notice any clear shifts. I'm going to tell you a little bit later on. One of the more common questions that they ask you is, where was there a shift? And that can be a shift in the speaker's point of view, in tone, maybe going from something of a humorous tone to a more solemn tone, something like that, or purpose, that there does seem to be some kind of shift in rhetorical purpose, either maybe going from, explaining or declaring to convincing or persuading. Those are different rhetorical purposes. Okay, jot any short questions that you have in the margins, even like why or what does this mean? Just flagging some of that stuff, really short things will help you come back to it, and you'll have some footholds as you begin to come back and have those questions to answer. Okay, use the questions to focus your reading. I guess you could answer, do you do that? This is a strategy that some people find very useful. Questions may provide insight into the poem or passage. So some students find that skimming the questions before reading can help. If you do this, do it quickly. You don't really have time to go back and forth between the passage or the poem and the questions, and then back to the passage or poem again. You should have a strategy for that. And as you go through the year, decide what that is. Are you going to glance over the questions really quick before reading the passage? If that's helped you in the past, sometimes that can give you a read on what are you going to expect to see in this passage and what should you be reading for. Okay, some common sense tips when answering these questions. Read the questions carefully, obviously. Identify the type of question. As we go through the types of questions, hopefully you'll notice there are some things that we see time and time again. That familiarity will give you kind of a comfort level as you go through the exam. And it's good just to make a mental note. Okay, yeah, this is one of those types of questions. Here are some of the strategies that you can use with that type of question. And familiarity really does definitely help to boost your score. Cross off answers that you know are wrong. You know this. This is something that you've been doing for a long time, probably. But there usually are one or more questions that are very clearly wrong, and give yourself a better chance of getting the right answer, even if you don't quite know what the right answer is. There are questions, frequently questions, where there are two questions. It's a little ambiguous, two questions that seem like they might be correct. You need to choose the most correct. Now, how do you make that determination? I can't tell you in every single case how to do that, but the most correct answer is what you should be looking for, the one that is best supported by the passage. Go for that. Eliminate the one that's a little bit sketchier. Hopefully you can see the difference there, but that happens quite frequently. Don't overthink what seems to be a simple question. You probably have heard this. Don't overthink what seems to be a simple question. There are occasionally simple questions on the exam. If you look it over, you look over all the answers, and you think you just kind of know what it is. There is some research on this that you should not overthink a simple question. You should consider thinking twice about a more difficult question. Now, this is kind of new research. I actually saw it last week. A professor looked into this and said, when you have a little bit more of a difficult question, it makes sense to go back into that and to look at it again, that actually your second guess might be the better guess because you're thinking about it, you're looking for the evidence. What I would say is have a system for flagging questions that you find difficult. These are the ones you should return to. And I think you don't want to get bogged down for a long time on one. So if you notice that you're taking a little bit long on one, flag it in some way. Maybe put a question mark next to it and go back to it. You really should return to it, because it turns out that if you return to a difficult question and you kind of think about it, maybe go with your second guess because you really thought about it a little bit more, that actually that is a good idea. You can improve the quality of those guesses if you spend a little bit more time on it. Maybe that's something you do at the end of the passage. Maybe it's something you do at the end of the exam. A lot of people find they have some extra time at the end of that 1 hour period. You won't be able to return to it at the end of the entire exam, but at the end of that section, the multiple choice section. Okay, a little bit more here. There are a lot of questions about irony. Okay. This is tough because if you get some verbal irony wrong, you know what verbal irony is, right? It's basically saying kind of the opposite of what you mean, or the opposite of what you say. That's what it means. So irony is kind of tough in the sense that if you're reading it as not ironic, you may not only get sort of a wrong message, you may get the exact opposite message about the passage. One thing that you can look at here, just looking at the questions alone, is the correct answer will itself sound ironic. So you could actually not even see the passage, and that correct answer should sound ironic, whether it's verbally ironic or situationally ironic. It should actually be within the question itself, within the answer. For the accept questions, look for the thing that doesn't seem like the others. That would be a good one to kind of take out, that might be the thing. This is something that you can maybe do without necessarily even knowing anything about the passage. You could see, okay, which of these things is not like the others? And, consider that might be the right answer. Do not avoid questions that require the rereading of lines or paragraphs from the text. They're going to actually have you refer back to the text. Go back. Now, your notes and your annotations should help you at this point as you reread so that you can do that efficiently. Okay, so I think that's all I have for this section. We're going to go into the types of questions that you're going to encounter on the exam. Let me see if you guys have any questions about any of those strategies. Do you have any strategies actually that you use just generally on multiple choice that you've found useful? Actually, that's a very good question. Does anyone have any ideas or strategies that they use generally on multiple choice? Let me go back over here. All right, so let's see. I'm going to answer some of these questions. We got some over here. Let me go here really quick. So what do we got? All right, yeah, we're going over Othello essays. We're starting to look at the poetry prompt. We're starting to work on poems. I'd like to talk about the essays. Brenda, okay, yep, we're definitely going to come back to those. What are the key points to remember while answering multiple choice? Hopefully, I'm answering this a little bit, Sophia. Let me know if I didn't answer it fully. Are there questions about the definition of literary devices? You do need to know your literary devices, Naya. We're going to spend some time on that. That's going to be helpful both for the multiple choice and for the essay section. Okay, let me come over here to this, some of these other things. I don't think those really were things that I needed to answer in depth. Let me know if I didn't answer that fully. Okay, are there questions about definitions? Yes, there are. Would you consider this much more difficult than the SAT English section? Very similar. Actually, it's same company, College Board. So actually, you may really notice that this has a lot in common with that level of difficulty. It's been a while since I've checked out the SAT since I don't have juniors. But same company, and I know that they really are trying to get these things to match up a little bit. Multiple choice, similar to the SAT reading section. Same answer. Yeah, I think that it does have a lot of similarities as you'll see as we get into some of the questions. Should we skip passages when we're having a hard time understanding? I don't know about a whole passage. I definitely would give it my best shot. I would annotate the heck out of it and notice what I can notice, Stephen. But I think that it makes sense to maybe skip some of the questions and definitely flag them. How much time should we spend per passage? So there are going to be anywhere from 5 to 6 sections. So you will want to spend about 5 to 10 or so minutes on each of those, 10 to 12 minutes on each of those sections. Maybe it makes sense to actually see how many sections there are. Some people find that poetry is easier than prose. So sometimes, the prose takes longer. Sometimes the poetry takes longer because I want to take more than one look at this, which makes a lot of sense. Yara, you skim the questions beforehand. Letter of the day is my strategy. Okay, excellent. Love that one. Trying to answer the question before looking at the given answer options. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so don't even look at those and see if it's down there. Answer the easy ones first, then give yourself time for the hard ones. Good idea. Yeah, that kind of goes along a little bit with the research there, Stephen. Take my time reading the passage, then I can quickly skim it later if I need to look for an answer. Good idea. Yep, good idea, Sebastian. Try to answer the easy ones before the difficult ones. And what are the most difficult types of questions? That's a good question, Tamara. I'm going to kind of go over a couple of those. Looks like I have one more question down here. And let me see what that is. Which strategy would you recommend if we find ourselves running out of time? Good question. You're not, one thing that I can say about that, Antonio, is that you are not punished for guessing. So I would definitely fill out every single bubble. But I think I would try to get through and answer as many of those as I can, maybe again, the easy ones. And then, if worst comes to worst, guess. I mean, go ahead and I don't know that there's necessarily a letter that gets chosen more often, but I would definitely put something down for that. Okay. So I'm going to go back and we'll take a look at some of these questions. Again, familiarity is the goal today. And I want to just talk about some of the questions that you'll see frequently. One is that involves the meaning of a word in context. These are not words that are hard. These are not high-level vocabulary, but we know that words have different denotative meanings or maybe even connotations in a given context. So this is just kind of a general ability to kind of understand the meaning of a word in a sentence. And actually, a lot of the answers would work if it weren't in the context. So it's controlled by the context, and you have to kind of look at the sentence to see what meaning the word or phrase is. Involves terminology, and I think we had a question about this. Yes, it makes sense to study terminology. A lot of terminology. You're going to notice, actually, I'll share about 3 or 4 questions, and there's a fair amount of literary terminology that is on this exam, and easy way to prepare for that is just to know them. Okay, Roman numerals. Yeah, this is on the SAT. This is on the ACT. A little bit less common in recent years, but the Roman numeral type of question actually has some strategies that we can use there. Has a 2-part component, so this and that, and we'll see that quite frequently. There is strategy for that as well. Another one that I mentioned a little bit earlier requires identifying a shift in tone or in purpose, involves irony. Take a look at a couple of those, and requires making an inference about the part of the whole. So that's like, what kind of character do we have here based on, the way that they're talking or acting. Also just the passage as a whole. What is this about? What is the theme? Any of those types of things. What's the rhetorical purpose of this passage? Get a lot of those, at least one of those, that they want you to talk about the passage as a whole, or they want you to make an inference about a certain part of the passage. Okay, meaning of the word in context. So cross out anything that this word or phrase could not be interpreted as. I mean, like, even without seeing the passage, this would not work. There's no way you could interpret whatever the word or passage is as, having that denotation or connotation. So there usually are at least one of those that you probably could cross off, reread the phrase in the context of those lines. This is one where they're going to direct you back to the passage. Do not avoid that. There's going to be answers that look right. You need to go back to the passage and actually check it out. So here's one. We probably know indifferent. We've probably seen that word before. This is not like a high-level vocabulary word, but in the context, line 33, it is best interpreted to mean. Okay, so inconsistent, unbiased, apathetic, insignificant, moderate. Now, you might notice that actually there's a couple of these that I would probably get rid of. I don't think indifferent is ever inconsistent. Unbiased, yeah, I think so. If you're indifferent to the case, it's actually, like talking in a legal kind of setting, that might work. Apathetic, absolutely, that is that kind of a synonym for indifferent. Insignificant, not really. I don't think that would ever be the right answer. Moderate, yeah, I think that could be that you're kind of a moderate person. You'd be a good person to maybe moderate. Okay, so you see, I just got rid of 2 possible options there. In the context, winnowing is best understood to mean, now this actually might need to kind of know, but you can go to line 15 and you can kind of see the context. It does end up being sifting. Hopefully you can kind of see that. Even if you didn't know that word, it's an agricultural word, you might be able to tell that from the context. Here's a phrase. In context, the phrase transfix the flourish is best understood to mean very poetic wording there. I think I can get rid of a couple of these options here. Transfix means to kind of hold in place. Like if you get a deer in the headlights, they're transfixed, kind of frozen. And then flourish, I'm thinking growth. I'm thinking expansion. I don't think raise the hopes. I don't see that. I don't see how transfix would be raise. I don't see how flourish, maybe with hopes, possibly, but I don't think so. I think that's really one that I can eliminate. Satisfy the desires. No, I can't see either of those words corresponding with that. And so actually, you see, I just got rid of two choices there. So this is one, I think definitely looking at the question, seeing if you can get rid of any of the options, and then go back to line 9 and see if you can choose between the remaining one. I think that the other ones of these makes a little bit of sense, possibly, but I'm going to have to go back to the passage to check it. Okay, involves terminology. Yep. Study your literary and poetic elements. I'm going to give you guys some resources for this as the year goes on. But you just can't get around it. You need to know a lot of literary and poetic terminology. Practice noticing how these are used in poems and prose. Another thing you cannot avoid is getting good at close reading. So, when you're working on the essay sections and you're working on your timed writing, you're working on the multiple choice section. Really, you need to get good at not only knowing the words and definitions, the terminology, the definitions, but also how do poets use these things? Be able to recognize it when you see it. Also be able to see and appreciate how poets and writers use poetic and literary elements. Okay, so see if you know all these ones. The poem is best described as A, sestina, B, English, Shakespearean sonnet, C, Italian, Petrarchan sonnet, D, an ode, E, a ballad. So, that's the kind of terminology that we're talking about. Phrase, calmly rushing, euphemism, apostrophe, oxymoron, assonance, hyperbole. And then here's another one, line 10, alliteration, assonance, consonance, internal rhyme, iambic meter, and personification, hyperbole, allusion, synecdoche, and onomatopoeia. So as we go through this year, probably maybe getting into it next week, depending on what you guys want to talk about. I think I might get back into the poetry prompt. We are going to hit all of these, and I'm going to give you some resources that you can use to get better at these, noticing these. And you do need to know them because there's at least, anywhere from 5 to 7 of these questions on the exam. Okay, moving on. Roman numeral type. You've probably seen these if you've taken the ACT or SAT. First step, eliminate any obviously wrong numerals. Cross out any options that feature the obviously wrong numerals. Okay, so, and then choose among the remaining. Okay, you ever seen one of these before? Okay, so you have descriptions of drops of oil as reluctant suggests which of the following. And Roman numeral 1 is the oil separated from the potatoes people were trying to heat. 2, the impoverished people were hesitant to use up the precious oil. 3, the meager supply of oil was nearly exhausted. I'm not going to bother you with the passage here. I'm just going to kind of go through this process and just say that was wrong. That was not in the passage. These other two, maybe. And you can see actually authors and poets like to have multiple meanings. But these are a little bit more poetic meanings, more literary meanings, I think, more figurative meanings. And look at what we can do. We just crossed out Roman numeral 1. That means we can cross out A, we can cross out C, we can cross out E. And now we're down to 2 options. Okay, because all those options had 1 in them, and we're pretty confident that 1 is not one of the answers, so we can eliminate anything that has 1 in it. And, these are time hogs. So any kind of method that you can use to kind of streamline this process, and that's kind of what I'm giving you here, is going to be helpful. Okay, 2-part component. This can feature high-level vocabulary. It seems like they really use these 2-part component ones to show you some high-level vocabulary. Just keep reading books, and, if you don't know a word, look it up. There's no real way, honestly, to prepare for that. There's just too many words to learn, but you should be learning, high-level vocabulary whenever possible. But the cool thing about the two-part component, there is a strategy. Both parts need to be true. Eliminate the whole answer if one of those is wrong. Save yourself some time on this. This is a time hog as well. You might also look for any groupings of similar options. This may provide some insight as to, maybe I can cross all these off, or maybe actually if it's an accept question, it's not going to be one of these. So let me show you what I have. A lot of times there's an and between the two things. So if one of those things is wrong, cross off the entire thing. Save yourself some time. If you're pretty sure that one of those two things that is mentioned as a contrast or comparison is wrong, cross it out. The whole thing. So you can have, but or and, either one, but you see kind of these little bit higher level vocab words that are being used on either side, but it needs to be both of these things. Both of them need to be true. All right, and then you have another one here. You get a little bit fancy. One thing that I noticed here, look at this. Idyllic, agricultural, and rural. I'm just noticing a little bit of a pattern there. Those kind of seem like similar things, and that may give me some insight. I can mark this up a little bit before I make my choice as I go back to the passage. Does that give me some insight into that? Those are the wrong answers, potentially, maybe. Okay, so that's something you should definitely take a look at and see if there are some that kind of are grouped together. Okay, identifying a shift. Look for keywords like but, though, whereas. Okay, those are words that kind of indicate that we're moving in a different direction. Eliminate keywords indicating continuance, like and, again. Also, that doesn't seem like a shift. We're probably continuing to talk about the same thing. Okay, so got a couple of these. The main shift in the passage occurs, and here you're pretty much going to have to go to each of those lines, and maybe you flagged it. Remember, this is one of the things I want you to flag in your annotations. And any shifts that you notice, you should flag those when you see them, because there's probably going to be a question about them. And then a lot of times there is this question about what signals a shift. So let's mark this up a little bit, though. Okay, well, that very well could be a shift. Usually that's a transitional word that means we're moving in a different direction. While, that's another one that indicates maybe in a different direction. While or whereas, not like. Okay, so those are some things that I'm looking for. Now, obviously it can't be all three, but I could go to those places and see if there's a major shift that occurs. Again, now I can't say this for absolute sure, but again is kind of like that might be a continuance, not really a shift. And let's see, and. Okay, so and is another one that might indicate this is a continuance of what I was saying before. It is not a shift. Okay, involves irony. The irony will be in the answer itself. As I mentioned, eliminate all answers that do not involve irony, and usually this is a situational form of irony. Here's one that has irony in it. Which of the following statements best captures the central irony presented in the passage? Read through these and see whether these statements are indeed ironic. And I read through them, and I kind of decided accomplished artists often create havoc in their own personal lives. Well, that's kind of true, but it's not really ironic. I mean, it's not really something that you wouldn't expect. Actually, a lot of artists kind of have turbulent personal lives. I didn't feel like that was situational irony. Events that seem ordinary in childhood can later appear bizarre. That may be somewhat strange, but I really didn't think that was a strong example of irony. These remaining three, if you notice, do kind of show some irony. And as you kind of glance over those, I'll just let you kind of look at those. Each of those does contain some irony. And of course, I'm going to have to go back to the passage. But one thing you can definitely do is get rid of any of the options that are not themselves ironic. Okay, last one is inference about the part in the whole. There's no real way to kind of simplify this or summarize this, but annotations and close reading help. Take a look at other questions for insight. If it's a part definitely take time to reread that section. You cannot not go back to the section and read the section that they want you to pay attention to. It's worth the time. If it's the whole, it is worth spending a little extra time on this, because if you get one of these kind of like inference about the whole wrong, you may be on the totally wrong track with the passage. Okay, so you definitely want to make sure that you get those passage as a whole questions right. And we got some of these here. I'm just going to kind of quickly go over these because actually I am taking a pretty good amount of time here. But you see, these are just kind of big picture type things. And it would be really good. It would make a little bit of sense actually to look for these. If you're looking for guidance, if you're looking for questions that may be able to give you some insight in the passage, you might want to go for these passage as a whole type questions because they really are, the theme is going to be in one of them. Okay. Well, here is the resource that I'm going to give you. I'm going to switch back over and answer questions here in a second. But this is a released multiple choice section. Actually, it has the free response questions at the end of it as well. It has the answers at the very end of it. And if you would like to do a multiple choice section at some time for the fun of it and see how you do, I'll ask you guys next week how you did. If you want to do this, and we can maybe say, you know, I'm struggling with prose or with poetry, maybe we can kind of zero in on what are the types of things that are giving us trouble. But when you get this, this is a case sensitive URL, and I will post it in our stream as well. So let me grab this and then I'll go back over and answer whatever questions you have. See if I can get this before we leave. Okay, here's that URL. Now, let me answer a couple of your questions. Actually, let me just really quickly say a couple things. I got to make a pitch to y'all, and we're going to be kind of Amanda is kind of moving in a direction with this. All of our live reviews were free in September, and but in order to keep access to the replays and watch all upcoming sessions, you're going to need to join. Okay, so this is kind of our pitch now. In October 1st, we're in fall early bird mode, and it's only $15 per subject or $30 for all subjects for the entire year. It's a one-time payment, and it's way cheaper than any other live support you can find. We are on the very cheap end of the spectrum. We literally saved over 1 million last year in college credits because college is so expensive. So you're going to have a link, and I'm going to see if I can get you this link soon, but basically we'll let you know about this, but we're coming up on this very soon. Y'all are on top of things early. So we're going to reward you with kind of like a fraction of what it's going to be in May, because when people start freaking out and really wanting to get some cram stuff in, it's going to be more expensive at that point. And I'm not sure what it's going to be, but it's basically going to be gradated throughout the year. Okay, let me go over here. Let me go back. Where did I leave off? What are the most difficult types of questions? I told you, Tamara, what some of the time hogs are. I think the two-part questions are time hogs. I think the are time hogs. I think in terms of difficulty, maybe the inferences are just in terms of, like figuring out what is the big picture meaning of this passage. Okay. How many types of questions are there? I think I had around 8 or something like that. Those are the categories. You can categorize them a couple different ways. Okay, I knew like 3 of those words. Yeah, I need to study. And Sebastian, I am going to give you some resources. We're going to go over a lot of them. And I hope that at the end of the year, you'll be like, okay, I know what synecdoche is. I know what a Petrarchan sonnet is. I know how it's different than a Shakespearean sonnet. Okay, Brenda, I'm going to have to study. Multiple choice similar to the ones in AP Spanish Lit. I'm not sure. Probably. I would guess so. Sort of like the SAT with the Roman numerals. Yes. And hopefully that strategy was helpful to you, because there is a strategy there. They are time hogs, but in some ways they're easy to cross out some of the wrong answers. Almost right answer is a wrong answer. Okay. Can we receive a link for the recording of this live stream? Yara, this should post immediately when I end the broadcast. It basically will post immediately here, and then as time goes on, they are going to be sequestered away to the Fivable website. And so after October 1st, that's where you're going to have to go to get them. And again, $15 a subject, $30 for all subjects for the entire year. And the people who are coming in late are going to have to pay more than that. What do you think is the most efficient way to learn high-level vocabulary? Bruno, that's a tough one. That is kind of an ongoing issue. I have decided in my own classes that I don't do it. It's like a crapshoot. I think it's a good idea to continue reading high-level works of literature, literature of recognized literary merit. And, and just when you notice any of those words, or your teacher uses any of those words, or you notice them in any of the multiple choice sections that you encounter, just keep learning words. I used to do it in the past. I used to teach them about 100 vocab words, but you know what? They didn't always show up. So maybe I don't know, maybe I'll post a list at some point if that would be helpful. But I honestly think there are some more important things to study. Okay, you know what? I'm going to keep answering questions, but that's pretty much all I have. I'm going to get through the remainder of the questions, and we're going to be here next week, same time Monday. I'm going to remind you about that. And actually, if I can get the link to sign up, I may post that here as well. But let me finish up answering these questions. And if any of you want to leave, you're welcome to do that. Nice seeing you all tonight. And I'll just continue answering these questions until you guys are done. Okay. So let me just go through the rest of this. Naya, should we pay attention to literary devices such as simile, personification, repetition, poems and prose? Yeah, prose. Yes. As I'm saying is that you should know the definitions of those. You should be able to recognize those when you see them. And lastly, you should really know how poets tend to use them. So if you were here last week, Naya, I remember, and so enjambment. Yeah, enjambment is breaking the line, where it's not a comma or a period in kind of an awkward way or an unexpected way. Well, how do poets generally use that? So first of all, having the definition, also being able to recognize it when you see it, like we saw it in the whipping. Lastly, though, how do poets generally use that? Well, a lot of times they use enjambment to show some turbulence, kind of like, I'm not feeling comfortable now. I'm feeling somewhat traumatized now. Anyway, it's not the only thing that it's used for, but it's a really good thing to learn those and learn how poets and authors use them. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. You're welcome, Sebastian. And then Yara, can we still get the other videos free right now? I think that they're in the place where we had the original session. Gosh, that's a question that I have. Let me find out about that. I believe that the replays there, I have a button for the replays here. I don't know if you have a button interface looks like. Okay. If I find out the answer to that, I'll let you know. But I think you should have free access to it, at least for the time being. Let me just see if there's any other questions here. Okay. Nothing new. Okay. I'm going to see if I can answer a couple of those questions. You're welcome, Naya. Thank you for coming. Yeah, I'll see if I can get those answered, and I'll post those if I can get the answer from Amanda here shortly. If not, I'll let you know next week. Okay, so I'm going to end the broadcast, but I may post a couple answers to that. And then again, the broadcast should be available right here a couple moments after it's done. Okay, all right. Nice seeing you all, and I'll see you next week.